Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to my channel, Do Ministry Gaming, and today we're going to be talking about the Awakeners Orb and the Mavens Orb. I'll be walking you through how each of these orbs work and also demo for you each of these orbs in action so you can see it for yourself. Now, I would personally consider these orbs to be sort of more advanced crafting currencies, specifically related to influence modifiers. And so if you're not familiar with what influence modifiers are or how they work, I do have a video out for that as well that goes through the basics of that, and I will link that in the description below. So I would highly recommend that you familiarize yourself with that before carrying on using an Awakener's Orb or a Maven's Orb yourself. All right, so we'll start with the Awakener's Orb, which I have one here. The Awakener's Orb is a Sirus only drop, and what it does is it takes two items of different influences and combines them into one item with both influences. Okay, so I do have an example of that. This Blightband Ruby ring is a dual influence ring that is a result of using an Awakener's Orb. And what this ring can do now is it can roll mods from both the Crusader and the Hunter mod pools, as well as the base mod pool. Okay, so back to the Awakener's Orb. I have prepared two body armors here to show you what's going to happen when I use the Awakener's Orb on these items. They are different influences. The first body armor is a Crusader body armor with one Crusader mod on it, which is enemies you kill explode, dealing 3% of their life as physical damage or explodey. And the other armor is a Hunter Astral Plate, which also only has one influence modifier on it, which is you can apply an additional curse. Now, what's going to happen when I use the Awakener's Orb is I'm going to use it, and then I'm going to use it on the first armor, and then use it on the second armor. And what it's going to do is it's going to take one influence modifier from the first armor, and then also destroy the first armor, and then apply that influence modifier to the second armor, and randomly pick an influence modifier from the second armor as well, and then re-roll the rest of the mods. Okay, so basically what it's going to do is it's going to take one influence modifier from first armor, one influence modifier from the second armor, combine them on the second armor, and then re-roll everything else. So for example, the armor, the life, and the lightning resist on this second armor is all going to be re-rolled. All right, so from here, there are a few things to talk about that are pretty important. The first, of course, is order matters. The first armor that you click on will always be the one that gets destroyed, and the second one you click on will always be the one that ends up with the dual influence. So in my case here, with the eel skin and the 6-link astral, I want to make sure I click the eel skin first and the astral second, because if I did it backwards, I'll end up destroying the astral plate and ending up with a dual influence eel skin, which is not what I want. Now, the second thing is that the item that you end up with that's dual influence will always retain all of its properties other than the mods that it's going to re-roll as a part of using the orb. So in this example, for this astral plate, the 6 white sockets, the 6 links, the 30 quality, item sells for much more to vendors, all of that is going to still be here when I use the Awakener's Orb on this astral plate. And the only things that are going to change is I'm going to end up with the 2 influence modifiers on it, and then the armor, the life, the resist, all that is going to get re-rolled as if it was a chaos orb. Now, the third thing to mention here is that it will randomly pick the influence modifiers from each armor to apply to the final product. And so in this case, since both armors only have one influence modifier each, it is going to guarantee those influence modifiers on the final product. However, influence items possibly can have multiple influence modifiers on them. For example, this Crusader plate can have explodey and maybe also physical damage taken as lightning, which is also a Crusader modifier. In the case that there's multiple modifiers, the process will randomly pick one. Okay, so you got to be careful when you're doing this. If you want to target 2 specific influence modifiers, one from each, make sure there's no other influence modifiers on the armors. Otherwise, you might end up with a product that you're not looking for. Okay, so one final thing to note is that there are certain mods that do exist across different influences. So for example, I think flasks have increased effect exist both on Elder mod as well as Redeemer influences. And so you cannot combine 2 items that have the same mod, essentially. They are mutually exclusive. You will not double up the mod, okay? So don't try that. And one very important thing that comes out of that is that on rings, the curse on hit, so flammability on hit, elemental weakness on hit, despair on hit, vulnerability on hit, those mods are considered the same mods, okay? They are mutually exclusive, as in, if you use an Awakener's Orb on flammability on hit and elemental weakness on hit, even though they're two different influences and two different sort of wording, you will not end up with a ring with both of those mods. It is going to end up bricking one of them, and your final product is only going to have one of those two curse on hit effects on it. So be aware, especially when you are doing this on rings. All right, so I think we're ready for the demo. I will be using this Awakener's Orb on the Eelskin Tunic and then on the Astral Plate. The result should be that the Astral Plate will end up with enemies you kill explode. It will end up with you can apply an additional curse, and then everything else is going to be re-rolled. So let's give that a go. Awakener's Orb, first armor, second armor. So Orb and the first armor are gone now, and I've got the new armor that has additional curse and explodey, and it has re-rolled everything else. So I ended up with 11 fire resist and 27 lightning resistance. Okay, so actually one thing I forgot to mention before I did all this is that you can only use an Awakener's Orb on the same base item types. For example, you can only do it on 2 helms or 2 boots or 2 gloves or 2 body armors, etc., etc. You can't combine a ring with an armor, for example. You can't cross-pollinate these mods, basically. So make sure the base item types are the same or it will not let you do it. So that is the end product. This armor is now dual influenced, and if I end up re-rolling them or harvest crafting them or exalting whatever I do to this, it can now end up rolling mods from both the Crusader pool and the Hunter pool on top of the base pool of mods. All right, so on to the Mavens Orb. As the name suggests, it is a Maven only drop, and as a result is pretty rare and pretty expensive to use, but also pretty powerful. Now, you can only use the Maven's Orb on a helmet, a chest, a gloves, or boots. Okay, so no jewelry and no weapons and no shield. And the item that you use it on also has to have at least 2 influence modifiers on it. Now, what the Maven's Orb does when you use it is that it will randomly remove one of the influence modifiers on the item and then elevate one of the other ones. So if your item has exactly 2 influence modifiers on it, it will remove one and then elevate the other. And if it has more than 2, it will do those at random. Now, what does elevating a modifier mean? Basically, for each influence modifier on the helm, chest, gloves, and boots, there is now an elevated version of that modifier as well. Basically, the same modifier, but better. Okay, so I prepared some boots here. These are Hunter boots, and these have 2 Hunter modifiers on it, 2 influence modifiers on them. The first being chance to avoid poison and bleeding, and the other being the more popular sort of Tailwind on crit. Now, the elevator version of Tailwind, for example, would be the same thing with increased Tailwind effect. Okay, so every influence mod will have this elevated version on it. And so if you end up hitting it with a Maven's Orb, it will go to that elevated version. Now, there is something very important to talk about here, and that is there are certain influence mods. Now, Tailwind only has 1 tier. It is Tailwind and it's Tailwind, only 1 tier. But there are certain influence mods. For example, I think there's percent strength can roll on Hunter boots as well. That have multiple tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and I think maybe even a 3rd tier, okay, or maybe just 1, 2 tier. The point is, if you're using an influence mod that has multiple tiers, the elevating of that mod will only bring it up 1 tier, okay? So if you're at tier 3, it will bring it up to tier 2 and tier 2 to tier 1. It's only when it's at tier 1 that it can go to elevate it, okay? So just be aware that that's very important. You can't take a tier 3 mod and elevate it to an elevated mod. It doesn't work like that. It will only bring it up to tier 2. And these Maven Orbs are quite expensive. This one is 12x currently. So make sure you are running tier 1 mods before you use Maven's Orb, or you are going to be pretty disappointed, I think. So now, like I say, I've prepared these boots here. These are hunter boots. They've got 2 hunter influences on them. And basically, when I use it on these boots, it will delete one of them and elevate the other. So what I'm really hoping for here is that it removes the poison and bleeding and elevate the tailwind. So we are going to do exactly that. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. And the opposite happened, but that's okay. This is just a demo. Basically what it did, if you may have noticed, is it removed the Tailwind mod and elevated the Avoid Poison and Bleeding, which you can see now on the actual tooltip. It says suffix modifier of the elevated hunt, denoting an elevated modifier. And so the other things to note is that nothing else on these boots changed. The movement speed, the life, and the rarity are all still there. It literally just removes one modifier, influence modifier, and elevates another one. All right, so there you are. That is the Maven Orb in action. As you can imagine, between the Maven's Orb and the Awakener's Orb, you can actually create some pretty powerful items. So for example, I've got these boots now with 1 elevated mod on them. If I did the same thing with the Maven's Orb with another pair of boots and a different influence and have a second elevated mod, I can now combine the 2 boots with an Awakener's Orb and create a pair of dual influence boots with 2 elevated mods on them. So as you can imagine, the combination of these orbs can create for some pretty powerful items. Okay, so just one final note, which is a pretty common question when it comes to the Maven's Orb, is that if I ended up with an item that has 1 elevated mod and 1 regular influence mod, can the Maven's Orb remove the elevated mod? And the answer is yes, it can remove the elevated mod, so be cautious when you decide to do something like that. All right, everybody, that should be everything you need to know to at least get started with the Awakener's Orb and the Maven's Orb. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found the video helpful. And if you did, please like and subscribe. I also stream on Twitch Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Times are in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.